Before we get started on the presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Ball State class, where you guys are going, and maybe give you a little bit more information about what the city's doing in this area. For purposes of introduction, my name is Adam Collins. I'm the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development for Mayor Greg Ballard here in the city of Indianapolis, and want to welcome you guys and everyone else here, and I'm glad that you guys are getting the opportunity to tour the city, get an idea of what we have going on. It's my understanding you guys have came down the Mass Ave corridor and gonna head up to the canal. I think those should provide you two very distinct views on how developments happen in Indianapolis over the last 20 years or so. When you look at the canal was something under Mayor Goldsmith where there was kind of an empty property. Everyone felt like there was an asset. And so there was an intentional strategy put forth to see development happen over there. And I don't have the data in front of me today, but I can tell you there's the amount of investment in that area exceeded $100 million in what you saw on the canal over its lifetime. So I worked closely with a gentleman who was a consultant on that project, and he has this aerial photo from 1990, which shows a completely blank canal with nothing around it. So it's been interesting to see how that's changed over the course of the last 20 or so years. The one thing I'll note is that as a very different environment for economic development then than it was today. And the big piece of that really has that really had a lot to do with that is eminent domain. So eminent domain was something that was used quite a bit in the canal area. And if you're not familiar with it, basically what it means is the city has the ability to come in, pay fair market value, but essentially take somebody's property. And so that's something that continues to be used by cities and states and municipalities, especially in the transit area, but it's become less and less palatable, both for courts and for administrations politically, on the economic development end. So for those of you who are familiar with Indianapolis and who have ever been to Lucas Oil Stadium, down here on the south side, there's a big bean company that's down there, the N.K. Hurst Bean Company. And there was originally an effort to try to take that property via eminent domain. Court came back and said, your economic reasons aren't strong enough to override a citizen's property interest, and as such it stays. So the good news is that development's been successful without it, but that was a way that things were done in the 90s that we don't really have the same tools today. So as you go down Mass Ave and look, obviously there are still a number of holes that are there that are present in terms of parking lots. And I think everybody agrees that a surface parking lot is really not an indication of a thriving downtown. We want to have density, you want to have rooftops, you want to have people who are coming up and down the street, eating, drinking, shopping, working. So over the course of the last 6 years under Mayor Ballard, the city's had a very intentional strategy related to increasing density downtown and creating really what are livable, walkable neighborhoods. And the reason for that is really twofold. One, it's a great way to capture property tax and income tax, which is necessary budgetarily to see a city survive, and that's the numbers reason. But most importantly, and I think the reason it's often overlooked, is the talent attraction. As you go around from somebody in my perspective in an economic development realm, and you ask companies, they say, what is needed? They say, we're Eli Lilly, we're Rolls-Royce, we're Allison Transmission. We're competing across the country and the globe for the best and the brightest. And it used to be that people were comfortable coming in, and a salary would be enough to get there. But as we go further and further along, it's becoming much more important for cities to have the types of places and spaces that really attract young talent. And that's what has really been the impetus for the city's strategy over the last 6 to 7 years. Now, as you go up Mass Ave, there are a couple projects, and I don't know, did you guys start at the far north end and come?
Yeah, we started up at Coca-Cola and then came down, went to Chatham Arch and then Lockerbie.
Okay.
Talk about how that kind of anchors.
So we've seen, and when you look at Mass Ave right now, we have approximately 1,000 units in the works in that general corridor. There's the former Star building, which is going to be just to our north here. You may have seen it. They've got some concrete pieces come up, which has gone from hosting the Indianapolis Star to what will be a multi-family mixed-use development. As you head north, you may have seen what we call the Mass Ave Fire Station, and it's a big empty block right there where the fire station and the credit union sit. So that actually received Historic Commission approval last Wednesday, and the fire station's going to be moved to a former Red Cross site, and the credit union's going to be moved over to the fire union hall, and that's going to open that block up for development. The city has over 400 units there, a $45 million development that's going to include about 40,000 square feet of retail. So it's a really great opportunity to start to connect the southern end of Mass Ave to the northern. Just across the street there, you may have seen the Barton Annex, and that's an affordable housing tower that's existed ever since I've lived in Indianapolis. But right around that, they've created a mix of affordable and market rate units, and they're finishing up the last part right now, again, to increase the density, increase the number of retail options, and that sense of vibrancy as we look at that corridor. Going further and further north, you also have along College there at the intersection of Mass Ave, the Circa project, which just opened up last week, which is about 250 units. And we have another greenfield lot about 2 blocks south that'll have another 250. So again, 1,000 units coming online in the next 2 to 3 years is greatly going to change the dynamic of that particular corridor. And the crown jewel of them all, if you will, is the Coke facility. It's a great facade, great structure, and something that may be currently being underutilized in terms of space. So there are a number of options from residential, whether it be single family or multifamily, office, commercial, the world is really your oyster with that site. That facade is so great you can find a way to do something with it. So in partnership with Indianapolis Public Schools, who currently owns that site and operates it as their bus facility, the city's constantly fielding requests from developers, and we continue to work with them and hope that we're going to be able to find a solution where perhaps at some point in the future we can find another home for IPS's bus facility operations, and again look at some sort of development at that space that'll really serve as a capstone for Mass Ave and start to lead into the neighborhoods beyond that particular corridor. I think one of the things, if you walk through the neighborhoods and can see, part of the city's strategy has been not to invest in multiple different areas spread out across the county. We've got a huge county for our size and a limited number of investment dollars. So what's critically important is to make targeted investment that really builds momentum and grows outside of where you start. So if you look at where the city's investment has been made in the last six to 7 years, what you'll see is a number of investments made towards filling gaps so that we can continue to spread that growth out in a fashion that you would typically see more in a city like Chicago. So I hope you guys get the opportunity. I think you'll see a little bit of the mixed nature of those two spaces. Mass Ave, obviously residential retail mix, probably one of the most thriving areas of downtown right now. And the canal, which has a little bit more of a commercial bent and was developed a little differently as well in terms of, I think, the density and how some of those places face the canal. So I think it's a great juxtaposition and hopefully something you guys will enjoy. One of the things I wanted to come talk to everybody about today and appreciate DMD giving time was about another area of the city that we think has tremendous potential, which is 16 Tech. I'll go through a number of slides here, but for those of you not familiar, and we've got a lot of young people here, so you know this, what you all are looking for when you leave work is different than what maybe my or Brad's generation looked for when we graduated from college. So increasingly, people are looking for an urban environment in some place where there's an opportunity for them to live, work, and play all in the same environment. And one of the ideas that's really been given a name here recently is Innovation District. So if any of you are familiar with a gentleman named Bruce Katz, he wrote a book called The Metropolitan Revolution, which I'd highly encourage you to read. It's about the relationship between cities and suburbs and the kind of the organization and the cooperation that's needed across a metro region to succeed. And he followed that up recently with a report sponsored by the Brookings Institute about innovation districts. And really the idea for him was to go back and take a look at these places in different cities where there's been a tremendous amount of innovation. So if you look at them, if you're familiar, Cambridge, Massachusetts, which sits in between MIT and Harvard. There's been a tremendous amount of growth, patent IP work that's been done there over the course of the last 25 years. So he wanted to see where could he find these geographic areas, and I've got the definition here, with anchor institutions and where companies cluster and you see catalytic growth in a commercial sense. And so there are some peer districts here as you look. There's Cortex in St. Louis, which has been in the news recently because they attracted an IKEA, which again goes to the different kind of mix that these districts have today versus a few years ago. And Mission Bay out in California, which is another area where the city had taken a former rail yard and converted it to this type of institution. And again, I'm ripping off Bruce Katz here, so there'll be no allegation of plagiarism. I've owned up to it. But when you look at the qualities that make an innovation district, they're really made up of these three different pieces: economic assets, networking assets, physical assets. And in the economic assets, what you're looking for are institutions that push things out. So what he calls innovation drivers, which could be an R&D institute. Any of these clusters, they always have some sort of research institute. Usually it's privately funded that's been the real cause of activity in that area. You also look at cultivators, which are accelerators, incubators, co-working space, things like that, where people have the opportunity to take those ideas and fill them out. And then the neighborhood building amenities, which are all the pieces that you need to have a successful mixed-use environment. You have the coffee shop, you have the residential opportunities, you have all those places at play. In addition, in terms of networking, the strong and weak ties, and really I think this is two different things. You have the opportunity where people are going to go every day, you know they're going to mix, but then what are the opportunities for folks to bump in and have these opportunities that would not have otherwise came up. You'll see this a ton in any kind of new corporation, any corporation that's doing new work in the tech space or others. They want to have those spaces where people from two different areas get together and collaborate on ideas and have opportunities that might not have otherwise occurred. And then looking at the physical assets, your public spaces. Here in Indianapolis, we have a real great example, the new Eskenazi Hospital, which has some of the best public spaces you'll see and was recently talked about in the New York Times. The private space, and again, is your space that these folks are working in and living in, is it set up successfully for them to operate? And then assets that tie those together, which I think Indianapolis has done a real great job of because we focused on connectivity. The Cultural Trail, by far, biggest and best example of something like that. But bike trails, pedestrian paths, all those other pieces that really connect all these. From the city, this all started going back to 2003, which stemmed from a report, what we call the Beyer-Blinder-Bell report. And it looked at some of Indianapolis's existing assets and said, you've got a corridor here where you've got a hospital, you have a school of medicine, you have an academic institution. We think there's a real opportunity to have a corridor along here that could drive commercial activity. So in 2009, Mayor Ballard established the Life Sciences Task Force, who really started to look at practically what do we need to do to implement this plan. These recommendations came forth in 2010 and some master planning started. And then in 2011, you really had action pick up. So it took a couple years to get that planning started, but once that happened, you had the planning that was done onto the streetscape. You had the redesign of Busch Stadium, which is another great asset that the city has and is redeveloped in this area. If you're not familiar with it, I highly suggest you go take a look and a tour. They've done an amazing job of transforming a former minor league baseball stadium that is, I think, late as 2008, had Cash for Clunkers cars in the outfield and trees growing out of the grandstands into this great apartment residential community. And that's when the redevelopment at that site happened for us. In 2013, Busch Stadium finally opened. It opened up, it was 100% fully leased before it opened, which is a tremendous success in any market at any time. And they began work on a phase 2. And then in 2014, what we realized is, as we sat down and looked at where we were headed, there had been some opportunities arise that perhaps required a change in our focus. So the city sat down with its stakeholders in this particular area, which include Indiana University, IU Health, Eskenazi, and BioCrossroads, which is a group that focuses on the growth of the life sciences sector in Indianapolis to figure out what could we do to make this more attractive. What you get an idea here from this map, and I wish I could take credit for creating it, but I did not, is an idea of where does 16 Tech fit into the geography and the local economy. And as you see, we have IU Health, IUPUI, you've got the different hospitals there, Marion University, and as you continue out to the west, not included in there is also the Motor Speedway. So if you think of it somewhat like a donut, there was this gap there. And in that gap sat about 100 acres of 1950s warehouse space that was probably somewhat underutilized. So when we looked at the fact that the geography was very walkable, there was that access to a hospital, that there was access to IUPUI, that we had trails that run along the White River and connect to Broad Ripple and connect to downtown, and that there were a number of different residential options that were not only coming online at that time, but some historical neighborhoods in that area that have houses that have really great bones. It seemed like this was the area where the city had the opportunity to really create this type of district. The early vision for us, and this is to give you an idea of how this process started, was a little bit more of a suburban master plan, quite honestly. So there's a unique feature to some of these properties here. The majority of the city's water supply is pumped out of a water utility parcel in and around that area. So you have some unique issues there that affect your development. But all in all, I think when you look at this, when this was created, which was probably 2009, 2010, this was really pre the Innovation District, I think, definition, and also reflects a change in what you've seen and how these districts are viewed overall. If you follow any conversation about what's happening with the Research Triangle in North Carolina or some of these other areas in California, San Jose, et cetera, what you see is this shift in desire. Folks are looking to go from what might be considered a more suburban office park that has a ton of corporate entities to really a dense, thriving environment that has a mix of different people. It has a mix of residents. It has a mix of researchers, office workers, retail, all those different things in one area. So looking at our initial master plan, what we realized is we were probably working under that pre-2012 theory and hadn't really updated this site to take advantage of what are some natural assets for us. The city had done some early planning to try to find ways to seed this district and make sure that any development that had came through would be successful. The first was by expanding the TIF district to cover the area. And for those of you who aren't familiar, tax increment financing is probably the number one tool that the city uses to redevelop an area, because unlike community development block grant funds, there's not income limits or anything like that set in them. So as long as you are able to, at least in Indianapolis, to find a property or find a project that would be successful, that has a need for funding, and that has the opportunity to be transformational, if it's located within the TIF district, the city can essentially borrow against the future property taxes to help cover some of the costs of developing that property. So it's an incredibly important tool for cities all over the country, but especially for us in this area. Another initiative that happened was a creation of a certified tech park, which is a partnership with the state that allows us to capture increment from sales tax, and again, we can use those funds to help with the cost of infrastructure, planning, some of those other items. And finally, the expanded reach of the regional center design guidelines, which made sure that as these properties were coming online, that they were being developed in a way that was more consistent with the central business district than an outlying suburban area. Financially, there have been a number of different investments made in this area, and again, this is just really to give you an idea of what all started to happen there. But the city has over $1 billion worth of investment that's occurred there since 2006. Now, I'm somewhat cheating when I give that number because $754 million came from the Eskenazi Hospital. So that was a pretty significant chunk. But when you look at the Eskenazi Hospital, the Simon Neuroscience Center, and then the new Marion School of Medicine, you had some pretty significant development along with a mix of residential along that area. And I'll emphasize the residential and tell you it's important because in these type of districts, residential always comes last. Residential and retail are always the two last things to come. And in some instances, we think we're very well situated here because we have that residential presence already. In terms of infrastructure, one of the things that the city had done, spending some of those resources that we had previously, was to go and improve the streetscape along 16th Street, Indiana, Harding Street, and some of our trail connections. And again, that was to start to, again, seed the area a little bit in the hopes that as folks come through, it doesn't take quite as much vision to see this area transformed. In terms of current assets, this just gives you an idea of the different ways that property is owned in this area and how the city's looked at it. What we call the Phase 1 parcel there in the blue is a property that the city had an option on and will be taken over sometime in the next probably 3 to 4 months. And so we look at that as really the core development area because the city has control. We have a relatively large piece of property that we can create a larger ecosystem in there. But the property is roughly split up into 3 different ownership groups. 1/3 is the city, 1/3 is the university, and 1/3 is private sector. And luckily to date, we've not had a ton of speculation in that area, so we have a lot of existing businesses that have been there for 20, 30 years that are happy where they are. They could be moved, I think, if the right opportunity came up. But you don't have situations where folks have came and gobbled up land in this area. Potential assets that we look at going forward to create, again, more of this urban innovation district is the opportunity to have new market tax credits out there. That's something that the city is pursuing in its allocation. The bike share and electric car share expansion. One of the big things is connectivity, mass transit. How do we deal with these issues? The city's is starting to build up, I think, momentum towards a mass transit solution. Well, I think we're hopeful development happens here before that. But I think when you look at what the transit options are, you have to do it across the depth and breadth of what's available. So you look at solutions that may not have been available a few years ago, like Uber, Lyft, the bike share, which has been tremendously successful. I saw the other day, over 5 months, we've had 75,000 rides in the city, making us, I believe, one of the most, if not the most, successful in the country. And then the oncoming Blue Indy, the electric car share program, which operates just like that, but just with a vehicle. In addition, we think there are some opportunities to create a network of different accelerator and incubator spaces that can feed from this space and give people access across the community. And then another piece that the city is actively pursuing is the opportunity to bring in somebody like Cisco, who has a smart and connected cities community, where they help build the infrastructure that can be used by these companies to measure and use the space in a more efficient fashion. As we've gone through a revised master plan here, again, our focus has been how do we promote these corridors along 16th Street? How do we promote the pedestrian links? How do we create an active and open space where people can get out and enjoy it? And so you start to see what we've really done is break this down. And the nice thing is we're in a place where we think we're close enough in investment that we can start to have goals for how we're going to develop this. We don't have to look at this in terms of our overall master plan. And what you see is a revised master plan that shows a possible bridge that goes across Fall Creek Place, again, to open up connectivity to the site that the city has, and then connect possibly to Eskenazi, which, again, is one of the great public spaces in Indianapolis. And as you come across there, what we show is the opportunity for about 300,000, I think, square feet of development in this area that we could see as initial phase one and would start to build up that momentum that we need to attract additional investment. And some of the different things that you'll see on there that we've included is a combination of retail and some sort of indication of a laboratory R&D piece or tenant. One of the pieces that's changed our focus over the last probably 15 months is an initiative that was started between a group called BioCrossroads, which is a nonprofit organization that focuses on life sciences development in the state, where they have partnered together to create the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute, which will be a $300 to $500 million privately funded institute focused on life sciences redevelopment. So as the city's looked at this created a little opportunity for a pivot for us, and we said we need to take the highest and best use and really shoot as high as we can in this area. And so we're continuing to work and really meet with the folks at the IBRI to continue to say, what is the opportunity for them to have a private home there? Because I think what you see in terms of the Institute is not only an element of these innovation districts that we talked about earlier, but the opportunity for private companies that are currently outside the market to come in and co-locate here in that area. So we look at this as an opportunity for something that will be transformational for Indianapolis and for this specific neighborhood for years to come. And what you see here is, again, just an idea of how the folks in our architecture end have helped us look at what would a more urban and a little bit more of a dense development look like over a 3 to 5 year period. And then finally, you get the 10-year plus plan concept. And if we're honest, we probably say 10 years is aggressive. 20 to 25 might be more reasonable. But I think if you go back and look at those two different concepts, what you'll see is a different connection of streets, more opportunity for street frontage, for retail, more defined public spaces, more defined residential opportunities to really create what we think, and similar to a model like they have in Cortex in St. Louis, is a urban environment that could really be successful as this kind of park. So with that, that's really kind of the update that the city has to share. I'll tell you, we're very, very hopeful after what's now been 5 years of working very, very hard on this project. We're going to have some significant announcements in 14 and 15 that will show that these efforts are starting to come to fruition. But as anyone's thinking and looking and trying to measure the success of a park like this, one thing I can tell you is that if it happens to 1 and 2 years, you didn't need the government to be involved, period. I mean, that means the market was there and existed. So we look at this as being one of the true areas where the city and its redevelopment efforts can be involved and really try to seed a development that has the chance that the market may not be extremely interested in today, but has the opportunity to provide millions, if not more, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment over the next 25 years, and more importantly, create the kind of jobs in our neighborhoods that we need for our neighborhoods to be successful as well. So it's a project we're extremely excited about, and again, I think one that when this is all said and done will be a lasting legacy for Mayor Ballard and his willingness to get this process started. So, Alex, I probably ran far over my time. I don't know, do we have questions? Is this typically what we do? Any questions from anybody? Please.
I know it may be much too early to project the types and number of jobs on this project as it moves forward, but I'd be curious to know, is there any thinking at this point on how the potential for this wonderful development matches up with some of the high unemployment in surrounding neighborhoods, and how perhaps we have an opportunity to create some very effective workforce development?
I think that's a great question. That's something that, and I didn't highlight, but as we look at it, you're talking about STEM jobs that are really going to be here and across a spectrum of very high end. But when you look at production labs, there's a very fair amount where they start at $20, $30 an hour jobs that come in as well. So one of the things that's been critically important, I think will be, is for the city to engage some of its partners to make sure that there are workforce training, that employee indies involved, and that our folks that are coming into the area are focused on the workforce training component. I think that's something you're starting to see. Lilly recently has been a great example of this. They're putting $22 million in pre-K because they believe it's that important to see the workforce of the future train. And we have a couple opportunities here, whether it be charter schools, the Polytechnic High School, or something like that, to continue to make this area a focus. But agree. It's 100% something we need to consider and will have to be a component of in order for this to be successful.